Try again.
Yonder music.
Hey y'all, what's happening? I like to pause sometimes and put up a little image on the screen just to make sure that when the camera comes on, I'm not already frozen in a weird little position. But it looks like it might actually be active. So let's go ahead and take that layer off so that I can't see y'all's faces. I don't even know why I'm pretending, but let's take the layer off anyway. Hey y'all, what's going on? Yes, it's cocked to the side like a Kangol on a 47-year-old man. Yes, it is. And I'm going to leave it because for today, for reasons, I like it. I like it cocked to the side. So I'm just going to do that. Um, but welcome to Storytime with Julian, episode number 97. And we're calling this episode, You Can't Really Go Wrong with Zora. Because, point of fact, you can't really go wrong with Zora. Like, even, I think I hesitate to use the word worst, but I think the most challenging Zora Neale Hurston story that we've read thus far has been Mutsy. Some of you all might remember that. That was pretty early in Storytime with Julian days. We read the story called Mutsy, and that one was a little bit challenging. But overall, whenever you hit a Zora Neale Hurston story, you're going to get something good. And I needed to come down out of the spaces of the speculative fiction and the magical realism and the sci-fi for a minute and get just a little bit more grounded. So we're going to read these two stories tonight and keep it kind of grounded. And that's going to enter us into our Memorial Day weekend. For me, it's my birthday weekend. My birthday is on Monday. I'm be turning 40 soon. And yeah, y'all. Unlike Jay-Z, I can't grow my hair out mad nappy and make an album about coming of age. But yeah, I'm at that age. And I'm feeling like I'm feeling, you know? I'm you know the feeling. When you're feeling like you're feeling. That's what I'm feeling right now. A little bit of that. But let me see who we've got here. I was excited because I saw some names that I hadn't seen in a while, and I'm hoping that y'all all made it from a pre-read. Not really the pre-read, but a pre-read. I hope you made it from a pre-read to this here episode of Storytime. Let's see who we've got. I see Kamisha Umstead is here. I see that we've got Angel Monique and we have Angela Rains. I see that Judy Lee has made it, and I see Nikki Mosquera is here. Hey Nikki, what's happening? Nikki, if you wouldn't mind, if you're so inclined, if you would, join us over on YouTube. Like that page, subscribe to that channel. Make sure that you get notifications over there on YouTube because that's where we're going to be growing things up. And when Storytime is on its break after the 100th episode, if I drop anything new, you'll find it on YouTube before you find it on Facebook. But we're glad to have you here anyhow. Neptia is here. Good to see you, Neptia07. And Judy Lee is doing her pre-read snack prep. I want to know what the snack prep is, Judy Lee. Let us know what the snack is. And while we're kind of greeting and meeting everybody, this is where you can find us. And there are a couple of things because I am trying to get to 1,000 is not a big number on YouTube, but it's a good modest start for what this program is up to. I'd like to get to 1,000 subscribers. And when we get to 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to be giving away the Storytime with Julian lit bag. It's going to be the first of many such contests. Now the bag is full. We've got some autographed books in there. We've got some Storytime with Julian faves in there. We've got some new things that haven't even been debuted on Storytime with Julian, but you'll get a chance to own them. And did I say there's some autographed books? There's a couple of different autographed copies of books in there too that I think y'all are going to enjoy. And it's going to be given away to one lucky viewer who has liked and subscribed to the page, who has liked a post and has commented on the post. Now, let me be clear. Let me even take this off the screen so you can look at my face when I say it. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about commenting in the thread. That's wonderful. Comment in the chat. That's where y'all chop it up and have a good old time. That's cool. But I need you to comment on the video. So when the video is done, when it is landed, go back to it and drop a comment there. Those are the ones that count as actual entries into the contest, okay? Or into the, I can't say contest. I have to say sweepstakes or giveaway. Can't say contest. So those are the ones that are actually counted as entries into the sweepstakes giveaway. All right. I see that we've got Marie Toussaint here. I see that Olive and Boo is here and Foxy Kitty is here. Tanya Horton is here. What's happening, Tanya Horton? Also want to say shout out and thank you to Tanya Horton, who also helped me acknowledge and celebrate my birthday in splendid fashion. Not only did she hit me up with a delightful toy, but also a wonderful children's book about Prince. And I should have brought it so I could show y'all on camera. Matter of fact, tell y'all what, somewhere in the 99th or 100th episode, we are going to read that book because it is just entirely too cute. Um, okay, so Angel wants us to know that Nikki is her cousin. Well, hello, cousin Nikki. Good to see you. I see Kitty is calling the crew. Paris, Renee, Cleopatra Jones, Taj Curry, come on through. What? Judy Lee, did you bring enough for the whole group, though? Did you bring enough for the whole group? Or are you just going to sit there by yourself and eat the lemon pound cake and the shaved ice and you just okay. All right. I see. I see who you are as a person, Judy Lee. Judy Lee is actually one of our greatest supporters. And I just want to thank you for always showing up and showing out and being present here on the show, but also contributing to the show. It's mad important. Let's see. Who else do I see? Okay, you know what? I do. I have an Amazon wish list full of Funko Pops. Angel Monique is pointing that out, and yes, I do, and I would love it if you wanted to get me one. This is a weird, difficult link to follow, but for those of you who are on Facebook, you can follow that weird, difficult link. I do. I love them. It's kind of like it's the little bit of retreat that I have because I adult the shit out of life most of the time. I find myself making the kind of uncomfortable decisions that yeah, you're just not burdened with those when you're a child or when you're younger. So looking to looking to escape from that, the Funko Pops are just that. They're just fun and cute, and it's nice to have something in your life that is legit just that. So should you feel so inclined, that list is there. You can find it. But let's go on. Happy birthday, old man. That's real. Yeah, yeah. The cool hairs don't lie. The cool hairs do not lie. But let's get into tonight's stories, shall we? I'm really, really excited about tonight because we're reading Zora Neale Hurston. And like I said, now you see that I keep looking up because from the way the camera is up and over is where I can see you all's comments. In the past few weeks, the camera that was situated in front of me, I could also kind of see some of the comments from that, so I could look straight ahead. This is weird, and I probably am not going to. I don't know. This camera itself, not so bad. Hopefully, I'm not looking as bright and shiny as I was. The camera itself, not so bad. The usage for me, a little bit difficult, a little bit different. But let's see. Let us go into our first story, which is the smaller of the two. And this is a bit of our Harlem. And I loved it because of the title. And, knowing the sort of complicated relationship between Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes during that period of what we call the Harlem Renaissance, I'm always curious how she writes Harlem. There was another story that we read recently, and I don't think it was a Zora Neale Hurston story, but it took place in Harlem. Where a young man was shown a wonderful kindness by a lady who brought him in. I think he was trying to steal from her. And she brought him in, fed him a good meal, gave him some money to buy some blue suede shoes. I need to go back through the archives and find that story because that was a good story. And I want to read more like that. But when I saw the first couple of lines of this story, it reminded me of that one. And it made me want to read it. And so I said, well, cool. And then I saw that it was a tiny little bitty thing. And because it was a tiny little bit of a story, I was like, okay, well, cool. We'll read that one for sure. And then we'll see what else we can read. I'm excited about this collection because there are a few stories that I don't think I've ever seen before that I'm kind of curious about. In fact, I'm looking at the one that comes right after this, which is called Drenched in the Light. And it's super short too. And do y'all mind if we just play a little bit? Because I kind of want to see how that one reads too. And hopefully they'll go fast enough that we won't have any problems dealing with the other story, which is the conversion of Sam. That story starts on page 20 and goes to page 37. So it's a 17 pager. No, a little further than that. Goes to about 40. So it's a 20 pager. We typically read about 30-page stories. So we should be able to do it. Let's play and see what we can do. But we're going to start with Thank You. Angel Monique reminded us that the story that I was thinking of was Thank You, Ma'am by Langston Hughes. So I'm kind of curious how that one balances out against this one. Let's find out. Let's see. He came into the shop with a pitifully small amount of cheap candy to sell. The men gruffly refused to buy or even to look at his wares, and he shuffled toward the door with such a forlorn air that the young lady called him back. She was smiling, partly because she liked to smile and did so whenever fate gave her a chance, and partly to put the tattered little hunchback at ease. The boy approached the table where the girl sat with the air of a homeless dog who hopes that he has found a friend. Let me see your candy, little boy. She toyed with the paper wrapped packages for a while. She knew that she would buy one even though she had but 15 cents in her pocketbook and a very vague notion as to where next week's rent would come from. The hunchback boy looked too dejected to turn away, however. She handed him a nickel. Thank you, ma'am, said the boy. You certainly is a nice lady. You ain't mean like some folk. Thank you, rejoined the girl. And where do you live? I lives down by 53rd Street. My mama, she dead even when I was a baby. And my father, too, he dead. Who takes care of you? My grandma. And she teaches me the Lord's Prayer, and I goes to Sunday school when I got shoes. See this coat? Ain't it nice? A lady gave it to me. It is a pretty coat, agreed the young woman. And do you belong to the church yet? No, not yet, but I guess I will someday. A lady that used to live with us say she got her religion, but after a while her sins come back on her. Do you know my teacher? No, I don't. What does she teach you? She teach me how to read and how to count to 100. And I forgot what comes after 97. Do you know? Let's see. 95, 96, 97. Gee, I can't learn that. Of course, laughed the girl. 98, 99, 100. What else does she teach you? She say when I go to heaven, I be white as snow, and the angels gonna take this lump out my back and make me tall. I guess maybe they roll something over my back like that machine, what they rolls out over the street with. The girl felt very much like laughing at this original idea, but seeing his serious face, she resisted and asked him very kindly how old he was. Let's see, answered the boy. Grandma she say I'm 15. Teacher, she say I'm 16. I guess I'm 16 because once, long time ago, I was 15 before. The young lady exhibited signs of flagging interest and asked no more questions, but the boy showed no inclination to go. His eyes never left her face, and at last he asked, Where's your mama and papa? Both dead. Who takes care of you then? Why, I do, myself. Nobody buys you nothing to eat, neither? No. The hunchback looked pitying at the girl, at himself, at the floor, and at last, in a voice full of pity, I guess maybe I can put on some long pants and marry you, and then I'll buy you something to eat. The girl would have laughed, but the world of empathy, understanding, and fellowship that showed in the boy's face and choked his voice restrained her. How often had she sought that same understanding fellowship within her own class, but how seldom had she found it. Well, lady, I'm going now because I got to make a fire in the stove for Grandma. But I come back again sometime because you's a nice lady. Maybe I bring you some Easter candy if I have some nickels. That's the day the Jews nailed Jesus to him in a box and put rocks on it. But he got out. Ask the Bible. He knows. And thus endeth the story. Yeah. That was an interesting little tidbit of a story. I'm thinking thoughts about it, feeling things about it, but I'm not really sure where I'm at with it yet. Love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call an audible, which I don't typically like to do, but I am going to call an audible and I want to read Drenched in Light. So give me just a second, y'all, because I want you to be able to, I want you to be able to see the title of the story while I'm reading it. So let me just go ahead and make a way out of no way right quick. And we're going to try and read this one real quick before we get into a big story of the night. But mention that caught my eye as I was flipping these pages trying to get to this one. So let's just see, shall we? If y'all don't mind. Hey, Gwen, it's good to see you. Glad to see that you joined us. I see now that Angel Monique reminded us of Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Jones of Thank You, Ma'am by Langston Hughes. It's interesting juxtaposing these two stories together. They come from two very, very different places, but yet they're still, it feels, they come from different places, or maybe they end in different places, but they seem to be cut from the same cloth. Let's see how Drenched in Light goes. I'm curious. Whew, okay, here we go. You Issy Watts, get off and down that gate post and rake up this yard. A little brown figure perched upon the gate post looked yearningly at the gleaming shell road that led to Orlando and down the road that led to Sanford and shrugged her thin shoulders. This heaped kindling on Grandma Potts's already burning ire. Lord of mercy, she screamed in rage. Here, Joe, give me that wash stick. I'll show that limb of Satan she can't shake herself at me. If she ain't down here by the time I gets there, I'll break her down into lines. Oh, Grandma, I see Miss George and Jim Robinson coming, and I want to wave at them, the child said petulantly. You just wave that rake this here yard, madam, else I'll take you down a buttonhole lower. You's too omanish, jumping up in everybody's face to pass. This struck the child in a very sore spot, for nothing pleased her so much as to sit atop the gatepost and hail the passing vehicles on their way to South Orlando or north to Sanford. That white shell road was a great attraction. She raced up and down the stretch of it before the gate like a round hold on. She raced up and down the stretch of it that lay before her gate like a round puppy dog, hailing gleefully all travelers. Everybody in the country, white and colored, knew little Isis Watts, the joyful. The Robinson brothers, white cattlemen, were particularly fond of her and always extended a stirrup for her to climb up and behind one of them for a short ride, or let her try to crack the long bull whips and yee-hoo at the cows. Grandma Potts went inside, and Isis literally waved the rake at the chaws of ribbon cane that lay so bountifully about the yard in company with the knots and peelings and a thick sprinkling of peanut hulls. The herd of cattle in their envelope of gray dust came alongside, and Isis dashed out to the nearest stirrup and was lifted up. Hello there, Snidlets. I was wondering where you was, said Jim Robinson as she snuggled down behind him in the saddle. They were almost out of the danger zone when Grandma emerged. You Isis, she bawled. The child slid down on the opposite side from the house and executed a flank movement through the corn patch that brought her into the yard from behind the privy. You little hasten, you. Where you been? Out in the backyard. Isis lied and did a cartwheel and a few fancy steps on her way to the front again. If you don't get to that yard, I'll make a mummock of you. Isis observed that Grandma was cutting a fancy assortment of switches from peach, guana, and cherry trees. She finished the yard rake by raking everything under the edge of the porch and began a romp with the dogs, those lean, floppy-eared coon hounds that all the country folks keep. But Grandma vetoed this also. Icy, you sit down on that porch. A great big 11-year-old girl racing and romping like that. Sit down. Isis impatiently flung herself upon the steps. Get up off them steps, you aggravating limb, before I get the hickories to you, and set yourself on chair. Isis petulantly arose and sat down as violently as possible in a chair, but slid down until she all but sat on her shoulder blades. Now look at you, Grandma screamed. Put your knees together and get up off on your backbone. Lord, you know this hellion is going to make me stomp her insides out. Isis sat bolt upright as if she wore a ramrod down her back and began to whistle. Now, there are certain things that Grandma Potts felt no one of this female persuasion should do. One was to sit with the knees separated. Setting brazen, she called it. And another was whistling. Another playing with boys. Neither must a lady cross her legs. Up she jumped from her seat to get the switches. So you's whistling in my face, huh? She glared till her eyes were beady, and Isis bolted for safety. But the noon hour brought John Watts, the widowed father, and this excused the child from sitting for criticism. Being the only girl in the family, of course she must wash the dishes, which she did in intervals between frolics with the dogs. She even gave Jake the puppy a swim in the dishpan by holding him suspended above the water that reeked of pot liquor, just high enough so that his feet would be immersed. The deluded puppy swam and swam without ever crossing the pan, much to his annoyance. Hearing Grandma, she hurriedly dropped him on the floor, which he tracked up with feet wet with dishwater. Grandma took her patching and settled down in the front room to sew. She did this every afternoon and invariably slept in the big red rocker with her head lolled back over the back, the sewing falling from her hand. Isis had crawled under the center table with its red plush cover with little round balls for fringe. She was lying on her back, imagining herself with various personages. She wore trailing robes, golden slippers with blue bottoms. She rode white horses with flaring pink nostrils to the horizon, for she still believed that that's to be the land's end. She was picturing herself grazing. She was picturing herself gazing over the edge of the world into the abyss when the spool of cotton fell from Grandma's lap and rolled away under the whatnot. Isis drew back from her contemplation of the nothingness at the horizon and glanced up at the sleeping woman. Her head had fallen back. She breathed with a regular snark intake and soft pusa exhaust. But Isis was a visual-minded child. She heard the snores only subconsciously, but she saw a straggling beard on Grandma's chin, trembling a little with every snark and pusa. They were long gray hairs curled here and there against the dark brown skin. Isis was moved with pity for her mother's mother. "Poor Grandma needs a shave," she murmured, and set about it. Just then, Joel, next older than Isis, entered with a can of bait. "Come on, Icy. We all go fishing. This perch is biting fine blue sink." "Shh," cautioned his sister. "I gotta shave, Grandma." "Who say so?" Joel asked, surprised. "Nobody don't have to tell me. Look at her chin. No ladies don't wear no whiskers if they can help it. But Grandma getting old and she don't know how to shave like me." The conference adjourned to the back porch lest Grandma wake. "Oh, Icy, you don't know nothing about shaving at all. But a man like me, I do so know." "You don't not. I'm gonna shave her myself." "No, you won't neither, smarty. I saw it first thought. I saw it first and thought it up first," Isis declared, and ran to the calico-covered box on the wall above the wash basin. She seized her father's razor. Joel was quick and seized the mug and brush. "Now," Isis cried defiantly, "I got the razor." "Goody, goody, 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 pussycat. I got the brush and you can't shave without lather. See? I know more than you," Joel retorted. "Oh, who don't know that?" Isis pretended to scorn. But seeing her progress blocked for lack of lather, she compromised. "I know. Lest we all shave her. You lather and I shave." This was agreeable to Joel. He made mountains of lather and anointed his own chin and the chin of Isis and the dogs, splashed the walls, and at last was persuaded to lather Grandma's chin. Not that he was loath, but he wanted his new plaything to last as long as possible. Isis stood on one side of the chair with the razor clutched Isis stood on one side of the chair with the razor clutched cleaver fashion. The niceties of razor handling had passed over her head. The thing with her was to hold the razor, sufficient in itself. Joel splashed on the lather in great gobs, and Grandma awoke. For one bewildered moment, she stared at the grinning boy with the brush and mug, but sensing another presence, she turned to behold the business face of Isis and the razor clutching hand. Her jaw dropped, and Grandma, forgetting years and rheumatism, bolted from the chair and fled from the house, screaming, "She's going to tell Papa, Icy. You ain't had no business with his razor, and he gonna lick your hide," Joel cried, running to replace the mug and brush. "You too, Chucklehead, you too," retorted Isis. "You was playing with his brush and put it all over the dogs. I seen you put it on Ned and Beulah." Isis shaved some slivers from the door jamb with a razor and replaced it in the box. Joel took his bait and pole and hurried to Blue Sink. Isis crawled under the house to brood over the whipping she knew would come. She had meant well. But sounding brass and tinkling cymbal drew her forth. The local lodge of the Great United Order of Oddfellows, led by a braying, thudding band, was marching in full regalia down the road. She had forgotten the barbecue and log rolling to be held today for the benefit of the new hall. Music, to Isis, meant motion. In a minute, razor and whipping forgotten, she was doing a fair imitation of the Spanish dancer she had seen in a medicine show some time before. Isis' feet were gifted. She could dance almost anything she saw. Up, up went her spirits, her brown little feet doing all sorts of intricate things in her body in rhythm, hand curving above her head. But the music was growing faint. Grandma nowhere in sight. She stole out of the gate, running and dancing after the band. Then she stopped. She couldn't dance at the carnival. Her dress was torn and dirty. She picked a long-stemmed daisy and thrust it behind her ear. But the dress, no better. Oh, an idea. In that battered round-top trunk in the bedroom. She raced back to the house, then happier raced down the white dusty road to the picnic grove, gorgeously clad. People laughed good-naturedly at her. The band played and Isis danced because she couldn't help it. A crowd of children gathered admiringly about her and wheeled lightly about, hand on hip, flower between her teeth, with the red and white fringe of the tablecloth, Grandma's new red tablecloth that she wore in lieu of a Spanish shawl, trailing in the dust. It was too ample for her meager form, but she wore it like a gypsy. Her brown feet twinkled in and out of the fringe. Some grown people joined the children around her. The grand exalted ruler rose to speak. The band was hushed, but Isis danced on, the crowd clapping their hands for her. No one listened to the exalted one, for little by little the multitude had surrounded the brown dancer. An automobile drove up the crown and halted. Two white men and a lady got out and pushed into the crowd, suppressing mirth discreetly behind gloved hands. Isis looked up and waved them a magnificent hail, and went on dancing until Grandma had returned to the house and missed Isis, and straightway sought her at the festivities, expecting to find her in her soiled dress, shoeless, gaping at the crowd. But what she saw drove her frantic. Here was her granddaughter dancing before a gaping crowd in her brand new red tablecloth and reeking of lemon extract, for Isis had added the final touch to her costume. She must have perfume. Isis saw Grandma and bolted. She heard her cry, "My God, my brand new tablecloth I just bought from Orlando," as she fled through the crowd and on into the woods. She followed the little creek until she came to a ford in a rutty wagon road that led to Apopka and laid down in the cool grass at the roadside. The April sun was quite hot. Misery, and woe settled down upon her, and the child wept. She knew another whipping was in store for her. "Oh, I wish I could die. Then Grandma and Papa will be sorry they beat me so much. I believe I'll run away and never go home no more. I'm going to drown myself in the creek." Her woe grew attractive. Isis got up and waded into the water. She routed out a tiny gator and a huge bullfrog. She splashed and sang, enjoying herself immensely. The purr of a motor struck her ear, and she saw a large, powerful car jolting along the rutty road toward her. It stopped at the water's edge. "Well, I declare, it's our little gypsy," exclaimed the man at the wheel. "What are you doing here now?" "I'm killing myself," Isis declared dramatically, "'cause Grandma beats me too much." There was a hearty burst of laughter from the machine. "You'll last some time the way you're going about it. Is this the way to Maitland? We want to go to the Park Hotel." Isis saw no longer any reason to die. She came up out of the water, holding up the dripping fringe of the tablecloth. "No, indeedy. You go to Maitland by the Shell Road. It goes by my house. And turn off Lake Sibelia to the Clay Road. That takes you right to the dough." "Well," went on the driver, smiling furtively, "could you quit dying long enough to go with us?" "Yes, sir," she said thoughtfully. "I want to go with you." The door of the car swung open. She was invited to a seat beside the driver. She had often dreamed of riding in one of these heavenly chariots, but never thought she would, actually. "Jump in, then, Madam Tragedy, and show us. We lost ourselves after we left your barbecue." During the drive, Isis explained to the kind lady who smelt faintly of violets and to the indifferent men that she was really a princess. She told them about her trips to the horizon, about the trailing gowns, the gold shoes with blue bottoms. She insisted on the blue bottoms. The white charger, the time when she was Hercules and had slain numerous dragons and sundry giants. At last the car approached her gate, over which stood the umbrella chinaberry tree. The car was abreast of the gate and had all but passed when Grandma spied her glorious tablecloth lying back against the upholstery of the Packard. "You, Icy!" she bawled. "You little rat, you! Come here this instant!" "That's me," the child confessed, mortified, to the lady on the rear seat. "Oh, Sewell, stop the car. This is where the child lives. I hate to give her up, though." "Do you want to keep me?" Isis brightened. "Oh, I wish I could, you shining little morsel. Wait, I'll try to save you a whipping this time." She dismounted with the gaudy lemon-flavored culprit and advanced toward the gate where Grandma stood glowering, switches in hand. "You gonna catch it from your head to your heels, my lady. Just come in here." "Why, good afternoon," she accosted the furious grandparent. "You're not going to whip this poor little thing, are you?" the lady asked in conciliatory tones. "Yes, ma'am. She the wussest little lamb that ever drawed breath. Just look at my new tablecloth. That ain't never been washed. She done traipsed all over the woods a-dancing and a-prancing in it. You done took a razor to me today and Lord knows what mo." Isis clung to the white hand fearfully. "I wasn't going to hurt Grandma, miss. I was just going to shave her whiskers for her, 'cause she old and can't." The white hand closed tightly over the little brown one that was quite soiled. She could understand the voluntary act of love, even though it miscarried. "Now, Mrs. Um, I didn't get the name. How much did your tablecloth cost?" "One whole big silver dollar all down in Orlando. Ain't had it a week yet." "Now, here's $5 to get another one." The little thing loves laughter. I want her to go on to the hotel and dance in that tablecloth for me. I can stand a little light today." "Oh, yes'm, yes'm," Grandma cut in. "Everything's all right. She can go, yes'm. Mm-hmm." The lady went on. "I want brightness, and this Isis is joy itself. Why, she's drenched in light." Isis, for the first time in her life, felt appreciated and danced up and down in an ecstasy of joy for a minute. "Now behave yourself, Icy, over at the hotel with the white folks," Grandma cautioned, pride in her voice, though she strove to hide it. "Lord, ma'am, that gal keeps me for fractions. I don't know my head from my feet. Or to comb her head, too, before she go with y'all." No, don't bother. I like her just as she is. I don't think she'd like it either, being combed and scrubbed. Come on, Isis." Feeling that Grandma had been somewhat squelched did not detract from Isis's spirit at all. She pranced over to the waiting motor and this time seated herself on the rear seat between the sweet-smelling lady and the rather aloof man in gray. "I'm going to stay with you all," she said with a great deal of warmth and snuggled up to her benefactress. "Want me to sing a song for you?" "There, Helen, you've been adopted," said the man with a short, harsh laugh. Oh, I hope so, Harry. She put an arm about her red draped figure at her side and drew it close until she felt the warm puffs of the child's breath against her side. She looked hungrily ahead of her and spoke into space rather than to anyone in the car. I want a little of her sunshine to soak into my soul. I need it. And thus ended the story. There was so much to like about this story. And then it turned so oddly. I just. So the title of this episode is You Can't Go Wrong with Zora. You can't really go wrong with Zora. And I'm going to maintain that to be true. But man, listen, getting in cars with strangers and dancing for white people and yes, Judy Lee said it, the vampiric nature of wanting to suck this child's joy and have it absorb into you, and grandma basically selling her out for 5 times of tablecloth money. And there was just so much about it that I was really, really, really into. And then the ending came and I just, I am so curious as to the motivation behind this story, because we know that Zora Neale Hurston had patrons, and we know that one of her biggest patrons was a wealthy white woman from up north who did enjoy visiting down south in Florida and those regions. We know that. And so part of me wants to assume that that this whole Kitty Foxy said it, the whole white savior narrative here was written to appease the money lenders. She knew where her next check was coming from. She knew the audience that she played to. She didn't always play to that audience, but she knew the audience that was buying her work. And I'm wondering how much of this had to do with that. Tanya Horton is remembering the story about the Red Clay Witch was in fact called The Red Clay Witch by N.K. Jemisin. And there was an exchange there where a white woman comes into the yard of another woman who is a witch. They're both different kinds of witches, and intends to purchase one of her children. So we're seeing, yeah, I can absolutely see strains of that in this story. Drenched in Light was such a beautiful and interesting title for things to go so south. Yeah, I'm my emotions are mad mixed right now. But let's move into the final story for the night. Let me take a look at the time and see how we're doing. Okay, we've got enough time to get through this story and to get and to make the most of it. So let's move into tonight's final story. We're gonna leave behind this little bit of white saviorism, and we're gonna see how the conversion of Sam treats us. All right, and this will be our final story for the night. Thank you all for coming through. For those of you all who have stayed, I see we've got a little bit of a smaller crowd tonight. That makes me kind of sad, but it's all right, because I don't do this for the people who are not here, right? I do this for those of you all who are. So for everybody who's here tonight, I'm so happy to have you, and we're going to keep it moving. The conversion of Sam. Jim's Restaurant is a dingy little place on Poplar Street. Now, Poplar Street, be it known, lies in a down-at-the-heel locality such as is found in all American cities, where the derelicts of all nations drag out their aimless existences. Drab, tottering old houses with grimy doors and broken windows squat along the narrow thoroughfare. Heavy wagons lumber over uneven cobblestones, and all manner of filth and trash litter the sidewalk and gutter. Indeed, the whole width of the street appears to be a gutter. The unwashed of both sexes and all races stroll up and down and hover in front of the slatterly business places. The Bucket of Blood, a notorious saloon, receiving the most attention. Jim was fat, black, and indolent, and his eating house reflected the character of his owner. In this fly-specked shop window there was displayed fresh pig's feet and ears, and chitlins that one more than half suspected had the same attention from the flies as the window itself. While his wife slaved in the hot kitchen, Jim lounged in one of the greasy chairs, talking loudly on the solution of the race problem with two of his cronies, the Reverend Zephaniah Solomon Meggs. Whew, that's a name. Zephaniah Solomon Meggs and Professor Cicero Omega Butts. They argued loud, they argued long, but all finally agreed that the salvation of the Negro lay in leisure. Too much work was sapping all the vitality from the race. Booker T. Washington was all wrong. There's no telling how many problems these three worthies might have solved had it not a slim octoroon stepped into the shop. She was young, fresh-looking, and clean, which marked her as a stranger in these parts. Jim jumped up as quickly as his immense body would permit, grinning from ear to ear. "Morning, miss. What do you have?" The girl shifted from one foot to the other and looked shyly about her. "I come to see if you're, uh, hire me for a waitress." Now, Jim had never considered hiring help in his small place. His wife did the cooking, and he himself waited on his patrons except when he got drunk, which was frequent. Then his wife did both the cooking and the waiting. But his mind was made up immediately. In fact, the girl could have gotten most anything that Jim had to give. "Why, yes, miss. I was just looking for a nice gal to wait on the place. Is you ready to start now? And what's your name?" "My name's Stella. I come from Virginia yesterday, and I allowed to get a job right away." "Wow, Miss Stella, you's hired at $5 a week for as long as you wants to stay. Walk right back and get your things." Stella started toward the rear, and the eyes of the men followed her. Seeing this, Jim began to tire of all problem discussions, yea, grew weary of the fellowship of the Reverend and Professor, and wished them far from Poplar Street. As they made no motion to leave, Jim mumbled something about looking after things, and followed Stella. It was a very easy matter to convince Mrs. Jim that she needed a waitress. The eyes of her husband told her it would be unhealthy for her to object. So Stella became a part of Poplar Street. The news of the coming of Stella spread like wildfire. The crowd of lilies, who usually sunned themselves in front of the barber shop across the way, promptly moved over to Jim's corner. Business picked up 100%. The place was always crowded. Moreover, Stella washed the window and scoured the floor, and the cleanliness was an added attraction. The Reverend and Professor became rivals for the favor of this country girl who was unconscious of her power to attract, and even Jim began to talk of getting out papers again, Miss Jim, and getting married again. For days, Stella showed no preference for any of her admirers. She blushed and giggled and blushed and continued to look clean and fresh and made everything about her look the same. Then one evening, a tall figure, shabbily clad, entered the eating house. The genial brown-skinned face was cracked in a broad grin. A black water spaniel followed closely with a pipe between its teeth. A titter ran over the room. Then the assembly laughed outright. People usually laughed when Sam and his dog made their appearance. Sam Simpson was shiftless. He never did any work unless exhibiting his trained dog could be called work. Good-natured and witty, he was liked by both colored and white folk alike. On seeing Stella, Sam made a grotesque bow and exclaimed, "St. Peter sure must be asleep on his job and letting angels fly away from heaven." The recipient of the crude compliment giggled and looked confused, and haltingly asked Sam what he would have to eat. Sam bestowed his most winning smile on Stella for a full minute, then answered, "Well, since you going to wait on me, I will eat something. Guess I'll take a graveyard stew." "What's that?" "Dog, baby, ain't you never heard tell of no graveyard stew? Where you from?"
"I'm from Virginia."
"Oh, I see. Well, graveyard stew is milk toast. Folks eat that when they 'bout to croak."
"Is you 'bout to croak?"
"I was. But since I seen you, I reckon I can hold out for a little longer." The loungers were listening and laughing at Sam's chaff. To them, he was Hitchcock, Burt Williams, Jolson, Lauder, Clifton Crawford, and all the other first-class comedians rolled in one. Stella went into the kitchen. The Professor C. Omega Butts turned on Sam. The green-eyed monster was at his vitals. He was determined that Sam should not win by any more sugary smiles and airy persiflage, and a few minutes that he had in many days, assiduous attention and lengthy, weighty words. What added to his fury, he noticed that Stella thought Sam clever. He therefore felt it time to squelch this Sam person once and for all. He cleared his throat, thrust forward his chest, and began, "Sam, do you know this lady's in trimmings?" "No, I don't. And I ain't worrying about what kind of trimming she wears. That ain't what I means. Do you know her entitlements?" "I don't know what she's entitled to, nother. And I ain't worried about that." The room rang with boisterous laughter, and the professor found it difficult to make himself heard. "I'm asking if you know the lady's name, but you's too ignorant to perceive the logic of my discussion," Professor Butts replied witheringly. Sam jumped to his feet and shook his fist under the nose of the other and shouted, "Look a here, shad-mouth nigger. I don't perceive none of your logic, and I don't want to. But I does perceive that your trousers need half soiling, and I'm going to wreck 'em further if you don't shut up with me. Going round trying to get respectable by wearing whiskers if after a man's homes if a man's homes did." Wow, hold on. Okay, got it. I told you I was going to stumble over some of this dialect. "I'm going to wreck 'em further if you don't shut up with me. Going around trying to get respectable by wearing whiskers. If a man is honest, he don't need no whiskers to hide behind." It was now the professor's turn to rise. He did so slowly, haltingly. "I perceives that. Oh, I'm tired of your perceivings. What makes you call yourself after professor? What is you professor of?" More tittering. "Well, I'm professor of everything. Not no one thing. I'm all around professor." Sam turned to his dog and gave him a playful kick. "Stand up, Professor Vicious, and shake hands with Professor Butts." The dog arose and offered his front paw to the irate man, who strode to the door pompously, trying to look pityingly on the assembly. As he stepped to the sidewalk, Sam yelled after him, "Say, Butts, the street cleaning department wants a nice fessa like yourself to lift garbage cans off on the sidewalk." The professor fled. Stella was beaming on Sam, whom she considered, in spite of his shabby clothes, the wittiest, most charming being on earth. Sam saw this and acted up to her. He told his funniest stories and put the dog through all his tricks, and told her in detail of the Murmurs Parade, in which he and his dog always figured. "Yes, Miss Stella, I'd be making money every day if I had a gal like you." Stella smiled and wriggled in her confusion. "Oh, Mr. Sam, you's joking now. I declare if you ain't the funniest, the teeniest man I ever seen." "Deed, I hope a shad might shoot me. Deed, I hope a shad might shoot me if I don't like you." No shad appeared with deadly weapons, so Sam continued. "Cause I knows I ain't Cause I knows I ain't got no call to be saying this, but if any of these lilies and sea buzzards what hung around here gets too fresh for you, just you let me know, and I'll take care of them." Sam looked hungrily into Stella's eyes for some sort of encouragement, but the girl only hung her head and traced a pattern on the floor with the toe of her shoe. She was a country girl and knew not the ways of city folk, or whose perfidy she had heard so often. Except for his clothes, Sam was her idea of a swell fellow, saying snappy things and defying all other aspirants to her hand. He was tall, too, a comforting thought. But how could she know that Sam really liked her? She had been told how city fellows made fools of country girls, and what would Sam Simpson do with a stupid thing like Stella? And besides, this was the first time that she had seen him, and her aunt had cautioned her against taking strange men seriously. So it was more than self-consciousness that kept the girl silent. Being neither accepted or refused as Lord Proctor of Stella's person, Sam was hopeful and made up his mind to win her somehow. He took stock of his personal appearance that night in the mirror in the barber shop and decided that a new suit, a shave, and a haircut might help some. But how was he to get all this money? His dog brought in no such sums. He must get a job. He felt that he was tired of loafing anyway. Stella did not see Sam for 2 weeks. Then he surprised all by walking into Jim's dressed in a snuff-colored suit. Though the suit was not new, it was clean and well pressed. He wore patent leather shoes with gray tops and a snuff-colored felt hat set rakishly over one eye. He strolled leisurely to a vacant chair, drinking in the admiration he was receiving from the assembly. Stella's heart jumped up and down so violently that she dropped a glass of water that she was carrying. Sam was at her side instantly, helping her to collect the fragments. For a minute, neither spoke. Then the man found his tongue. "Miss Stella, how you been making it since I seen you last?" "Yes, indeed. Mr. Sam, pretty good. I mean, all right. What you gonna eat?" "Bring me a regular 25-cent dinner, please, miss, and you needn't hurry at all." While Stella was in the kitchen, Sam struck up general conversation with 3 or 4 men who were sitting about for the pleasure of seeing Stella smile. He broke the news to these worthies that he was a working man now, had a job at Westcott's lumber yard at $15 per week, subject to a raise, and was thinking of settling down. When Stella returned, Sam asked her if she had been to a movie since she had been in town. "No, but I'd just love to go." "Get your bunnet and we'll just run around this evening." "I don't know if Mr. Jim will let me go." "Don't you worry about that child. I'll speak to him." And so he did, or rather spoke to Mrs. Jim when she poked her head into the dining room to see how things were going. Now, Mrs. Jim did not like Sam. She suspected him of making her person the butt of his many witticisms. His clothes surprised her, but did not allay her dislike for him. So when he spoke, she was ready to refuse as soon as he finished his request. "Now, Sam, you ain't nobody for Stella to be going round with." "Why?" Miss Jim flung her head up and closed her eyes in an attempt to look imposing. "'Cause you ain't nothing but tall trash." I'm just as good as you. I'm just as good as you is. You or Gene either. And you's glad enough to get him. When I was Stella's age, I was very particular who I accepted for my escorts, and you can tell her." "Well, you didn't pick much, but I don't reckon you had much chance."
Who, me? Everybody said I was pretty as pink when.
"Yes, I reckon you's about what you is now, a kitchen bouquet. And I reckon Jim married you when he's drunk."
Get out of my place, Sam."
"Oh, I ain't hurrying. But if you chunk one of them baked insults at me you calls biscuits, I wish I had went. You call this joint a restaurant? Why, this ain't nothing tall but a munition factory."
Stella entered from the rear with her hat and coat on, and Mrs. Jim, glad to escape from Sam's ridicule, turned on her. "Stella, if you leaves your work to go out with this scallywag, you needn't come back here no more." The girl wilted and turned to go to the rear with a sorrowful expression, but Sam detained her.
"Stella, come on. She ain't got nothing tall to do with you. She's just a derned old antique that's jealous of your looks. If she can make out without you, then you can more and make out without her. You can get a job most any place, and besides, I's got a job."
Stella hesitated. She wanted her job and wanted to go with Sam. At this juncture, Jim came waddling in, reeling under his load of bottled-in bond. He did not know what was going on, but he could see that his wife was angry and that Stella, his gold mine, his prosperity, had on her hat and coat, and that she was almost in tears. Even in his befuddled state, he could see that his prosperity would go with Stella, and if his wife were driving her out, she'd suffer for it. He rushed forward and fairly bellowed,
"What's going on, Matty? What you doing out here out the kitchen? Meddling in my affairs, I reckon, just as usual."
Maddie fairly quaked, and Sam, seeing her confusion, completed the route he had begun.
"Jim,
I asked Miss Stella to accompany me to the movies, and your wife say if she goes, she can't come back here and work no more. Now, I can't see why. Ain't she a good waitress and everything? Jim glared fiercely at Maddie as she shuffled toward the kitchen. I knowed it! I knowed it! He triumphantly exclaimed. The minute I come in that door, I could see that Maddie had been up to more devilment. A dog damn her, if she gon' get back in that kitchen and stay there, I'm gonna knock every one of them naps off in her head one by one. Cause Stella can go to the show with her and her gentleman friends when she get ready. Sam gathered the blushing Stella upon his arm and proudly fared forth, whereupon Jim flopped into a chair and held forth at great length on the necessity of keeping wives in their places, to wit, speechless and expressionless in the presence of their lords and masters, and cited several instances where men had met their downfall and utter ruin by ill-advisedly permitting their wives to err in their ignorance by talking. His audience, composed entirely of males, agreed with him. Wife beaters are numerous in Poplar Street. Sam went to work the next morning a happy man. Stella had accepted him as her fellow. How did he work? Mr. Bronner, the boss, remarked the fact that some of the men, How he did work. Mr. Bronner, the boss, remarked the fact to some of the men. He was due for a raise, and at the beginning of next month, he got it. Sam strode proudly into the restaurant the night following the afternoon upon which he had informed of his good fortune. Stella accompanied him to a movie as usual, where he broke the news to her. Cause we can get married now. He fumbled with his hat a while. If you'll have me. Stella looked down at her feet, played with her fingers a bit, but said nothing. Will you? Sam urged. I can take care on you like you ought to be took care on. And I'll work my toenails off for you. Then after that, I'll go get a regular job if you say the word. Does you love me just a little, Stella? Stella was thrilled to the heart by this passionate appeal. She loved Sam surely, and she wanted to be his wife, but she couldn't find a word of acceptance that didn't sound bold and brazen to her. But every woman, whether she be college-bred and city-reared, the daughter of wealth and fashion, or just a country girl like Stella, has felt that same lack of words under the same circumstance. After a while, Stella nodded her head in the affirmative. Sam grabbed her hand and pressed his suit with zeal. You gonna marry me, Stella? Stella nodded her head again in the affirmative. Sam squeezed her hand more tightly. Both lost sight of the screen story, sat there silently, their hearts beating audibly. It was a holy moment. Poplar Street was dumbfounded. No one thought a pretty girl like Stella would marry Sam. When the news went its rounds, the other aspirants to the hand of Stella rushed upon her, hoping and expecting a denial of the report, but no denial forthcoming, they shuffled away, chagrined. Sam ostentatiously displayed his catch. The nuptials were to be celebrated in September, 3 months later. Stella had insisted on this interval so that she might have time to get ready. Sam's employer was very fond of him because, besides being a good worker, Sam radiated good humor wherever he happened to be, and his witticisms kept his men about him in a cheerful mood and made good workers out of them too. So when he gleefully told Mr. Bronner of his approaching marriage, Sam's employer mentally resolved to do the handsome thing by him. A week before the date set before the nuptials, the Negro was agreeably surprised by Mr. Bronner's calling him into the office and asking him where he was going to live. Well, boss, I allowed to get some rooms there in Poplar Street. Sam, it would be better for you and better for your wife if you lived in a more respectable neighborhood. Yes, I guess it would. Well, I'm going to call up Mr. Hill, a friend of mine. He has some houses and flats to rent to coloreds. I'll see if he hasn't something uptown where the better class of Negroes live. How about it? Well, that'd be just fine, boss. You know, Stella, my Stella is a prettiest picture, boss, and I reckon some of them down low shadmouth niggas on Poplar Street going to give me trouble if I keeps her there, trying to put her agin me, you know. That's just it, Sam. Get away from the riffraff. You don't want your wife to associate with those women and listen to the kind of conversation that's common down there. I see do that, boss. 'Fore God, I will. Call up the man. There was such a note of sincerity in Sam's voice that the white man stared at him for a moment. Respect for the black man was born in him. but he answered in an offhand manner. All right, Sam. Now another thing. Don't go buying a lot of furniture on the installment plan. You may go now. I'll let you know when you can see the house. And Sam, comb your hair once or twice before you get married. Sam, with his hand on the door, turned and looked at Bronner and grinned. You reckon she noticed things like that? She sure does, Sam. Do as I tell you now. Get the habit. Sam went back to work happy but thoughtful. He was going to live uptown with the Dicties, those members of his race who were professional and well-off businessmen. Well, Stella deserved it. There was no woman among them possessed of more physical charms, and Stella was a lady, too. She never talked dirt nor mingled with the toughs, but it was hard to comb his hair, even for the sake of a goddess. Nevertheless, he went to a barber shop that evening and had his hair combed, trimmed, greased, and slicked down. My, how sore his head was after the operation. But he would gladly have gone through it every hour to win such admiring glances from Stella as she bestowed upon him that evening. He resolved to comb his hair every day after that. 2 days before his wedding, Sam was summoned to inspect the house that Mr. Bronner had selected for him. Sam went up the stone steps proudly. There was a tiny tiled vestibule, a brass doorbell, and a door with the upper half beveled glass. But when he stepped inside, he received the surprise of his life. The house was furnished. To be sure, the furniture was not new, but it was in good condition. The bewildered Sam turned to Mr. Bronner. Boss, the folks left where they moved yet? Yes, Sam. Well, how did this get here? My wife wanted new furniture at home, and we didn't have any place to put this. Then I thought of you and Stella might have use for it, and so here you are. Take good care of it, Sam. It's the stuff my wife and I started out with. I was an ordinary laborer then. Mr. Bronner paused and dropped down upon the davenport. You won't need any more furniture except for the kitchen until you've accumulated $5,000. We didn't have any old furniture for that. Sam's eyes were rolling around in his head from surprise and joy. Wouldn't Stella be a queen, though? He seized the hand of his benefactor and wrung it, not a natural act for a character like Sam. Deed, boss, I don't know what to say. I'm that glad and happy. Don't say anything, Sam. Just live an honest life and stick me down in the works above all. Respect and honor the woman you're marrying. Keep her clean. Here's your key. Mr. Hill says your rent is $20 per month. Pay promptly. Now come on and get into the car. I'll drop you at your present address. So Samuel Simpson, or Sam Shambles as he was called, married Stella Potts and moved uptown to the red brick house with the white marble steps. Stella worked some wonderful changes in Sam. For instance, she combed his hair so often that it was almost bereft of its ancestral kinks, and persuaded him that a person might bathe between Saturdays without unsettling the universe, and that it was expected of a Dictie to clean his fingernails at least once a day. Things went on very well for 5 or 6 months. Sam was becoming more proud and self-assured every day. He could see the neighbors casting admiring glances at his wife as they went forth arm in arm. He never went near Poplar Street anymore, for he had a bank account and was thinking of buying a piano. No Dicties lived in Poplar Street. But one day he met Bluefront, one of his old cronies, upon Poplar Street. Bluefront noted Sam's neatness, his air of importance, and hated him. He wondered if Sam would speak. Sam was polite, but reserved. "'Lo, Blue." "'Lo, Sam. I don't see you no more." "No, I was busy with my family. I hear you're addicted these days." Sam stiffened. Here was jealousy sticking out all over Blue. "Reckon that's about it." "No hard feelings. Come on, have a drink." "Nope, don't drink no more." "Well, a cigar then." "Nope, got a whole box of them at home." Bluefront's anger was kindled at Sam's rebuffs. Sam, who had been the rattiest of rats. He could barely suppress a snort of anger and scorn. Never mind. He'd pull him off his pinnacle and bring him down for his meeting Stella's, and bring him back to his before meeting Stella state sooner or later. So he must hide his chagrin. "Mr. Simpson, You don't object to my walking uptown with you, seeing your house, do you? Sam's first impulse was to refuse, but his pride in his home led to him grudgingly consenting. Bluefront was taken off his feet. He never thought to find Sam living so well. Stella was a gracious hostess, and while her husband proudly showed the envious Bluefront around, put supper on the table, and invited him to stay. She had veal cutlet and fried sweet potato, tea, and hot biscuit. Bluefront fairly guzzled, but his envy mounted till he could almost have murdered Sam for having a pretty wife and comfortable home. And two, after supper, that box of cigars came out, and while he grabbed two and thrust them into his pocket, he was plotting on how to pull his host off his perch. At last he rose to go. God, Sam, you's in soft. And Miss Simpson, your supper show was good. Sam's chest protruded. Yep, my little girl can really cook. Them was biscuits, not baked insults. And that was tea instead of red seal lied Jim sells down on Poplar Street, to say nothing about the gravy. Sam beamed on Stella, and she flushed with happiness. So long, Sam. See you later, said the departing guest as the host closed the door after him. Now, honey, he's going down to Poplar Street to tell all them niggas about us. They all turned green from jealousy. Come on, honey, and give me a kiss. You surely making a man out of me. Stella kissed him more than dutifully, and sitting on his lap, they planned many things to be bought in the near future. Though Bluefront did not come home with Sam again, he frequently accosted him on the way and walked a few blocks, flattering and praising him. Sam, being only human, warmed toward Blue and was persuaded one afternoon to go through Poplar Street. His old cronies gathered about, admiring and flattering. Come on, Sam, and drink something on me. That's a handsome suit you got on. You're looking sharp as a tack. Sam patronized and held a bit aloof, but he was pleased by the homage he was receiving. Sorry, gentlemen, but I ain't indulging no more. Hi there, High Pocket. Sam, come on, shoot a game of bones. Can't do it. Fin closed. My supper's waiting. Huh. I reckon my life done strap you up. You ain't got no change to spare. Sam grinned, thrust his hand in his pocket, and brought forth a roll of $1 bills, generously sprinkled with 5s and 10s. Guess I got the price all right. Oh, Sam, come on. Just one game? No. Sam was weakening, but he managed to tear himself away and go home. He had never been late before, and Stella was worried. He resolved never to go down there again. But the next afternoon, when he stepped into the street from the lumber yard, Bluefront and High Pocket were waiting for him. This time, he yielded. Into Poplar Street he went, and when once in Poplar Street, his old self seemed to take possession of him, and he gambled as in days gone by. Fortune favored him, and he went home $6 richer than this world's goods, but much poorer in spirit than since he first saw Stella. Though Stella said nothing, Sam felt the hurt shining out of her eyes, striking through him. He told her he'd been detained at work. That was the beginning. Night after night he visited Poplar Street, and night after night he lost money, sleep, and self-respect. Each day he resolved to stay away, but his past years told on him now. He lacked moral strength. He was 25 years old, and for 15 of those 25 years, he had lived in the streets and alleys, blackening boots, selling papers, and winning stakes at petty gambling. He would creep home to Stella, cringing and evasive of manner. She never questioned or scolded, though she knew he could not be at work at 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. Sam gradually lost all of his savings, and one first of the month he found himself unable to pay his rent. Mr. Hill waited 2 weeks, then went down to Mr. Bronner. That gentleman was surprised, but when he recalled to his mind having seen at various times disreputable-looking men hanging around waiting for Sam, light dawned upon him. He called Sam in, not the laughing Sam of yore, but a slinking, servile Sam, whose dog even seemed to feel his master's disgrace and slunk too. Sam was questioned closely, advised, and dismissed. He was utterly lost now. No job, no money, soon no home. For how could he get another job with Mr. Bronner's unfavorable recommendation? That night, he did not go home. He simply could not face Stella with tidings so unwelcome. He knew she would not reprove him, and that made it harder, for Sam loved his wife. He did not go home that night nor the next. A dozen times he started uptown, half crazed by his longing to see and reassure his young wife, but each time his courage failed him. He attempted again to borrow enough money to pay his rent, but failed. A few days before, he could have borrowed 5 times that sum at a moment's notice, but to the world now he was no longer Samuel Simpson, but merely Sam, jobless and penniless. He was in appearance no longer sharp as a tack. In the meanwhile, Stella, poor trusting Stella, was weeping and looking out of the window at irregular intervals, expecting to see the body of her lord brought to the door at any moment. She could not believe that Sam could be alive and remain away from her for 2 whole days. At last she dried her tears and went down to Mr. Bronner's office to inquire for Sam. She was surprised to hear that he was no longer employed by the lumberman. The kind-hearted man felt sorry for the unsophisticated negress because he thought that Sam had tired of her and gone back to his shiftless ways and left her to her own devices. After he discovered that she did not know her rent was unpaid, he telephoned his wife and influenced her to hire her as a chambermaid and advised the stricken girl to give up the house and take a room. Stella agreed and began working for Mrs. Bronner on the following morning. She went home more unhappy than ever, believing that Sam had cast her off and that city folk were just as wicked as provincials thought them to be. Sam wandered about Poplar Street, his dog at his heels from pool room to barber shop and from barber shop to bar, disconsolate and weary. His late admirers stood like Pharisees afar off. Sam no longer interested them. He was, in the language of the curb, on the bricks, or burnt up. Early that night he heard that there was to be a crap game at Sweetie's flat, the home of a disreputable woman on Popular Street. He felt in his pockets and found he still possessed 85 cents. In desperation, he resolved to sit in that game and try to win enough money to purchase his self-respect with his wife. If he lost the 85 cents, he would not be much worse off than he was at present. If he won, he clapped his hands over his eyes to shut out the vision of Stella, which was too much for him just now. So he went to Sweetie's and sat in the game. About 9 o'clock that night, Stella felt that she could bear Sam's absence no longer. She would seek him the world over and ask him why he did not love her still. Perhaps he might come home again and she could win his love once more. Anyway, if she could only see him once again, she felt she would be justified in a month's journey afoot. She went from room to room, looking at and touching things dear by association. The Morris chair, the smoking stand, the pillows in the window seat where she always watched for Sam's coming in the evenings, and where he found and invariably kissed her, the Cupid that hung by a ribbon from its waist from the bedpost. They had always taken the doll to bed and pretended it was their firstborn. Sam would ask about the baby as soon as he reached home, and Stella would run and fetch it, pretending at times that it had been fretful and cried for its dad. She decided that she could never disturb things, that if she could not find her husband, or if he refused to return to her, then perhaps God would, in his great love and kindness, let her go to sleep. She knew that she would be weary if she returned without Sam. So Stella put on her prettiest dress and went out to seek her lord. She went first to Poplar Street. No sign of Sam. People spoke to her. She answered timidly, glided away, peeping first into one den, then the other, and walked down the line. At last she asked Squeegee, Sweetie's pal, if she had seen him, and Squeegee glibly told her where he was. At last she asked Squeegee, Sweetie's pal, if she had seen him, and Squeegee glibly told her where he was. Stella turned and walked briskly in the direction pointed out by the woman. As she left the curb in her anxiety, she did not notice a swiftly approaching automobile. Stepping straight in front of it, she was felled to the ground. Squeegee saw the accident and ran forward. The occupants of the car, 2 men, quickly picked up the girl and placed her in the car. A policeman came up after and, going through the usual preliminaries, permitted the men to take her to the hospital. Squeegee gave the officer Stella's address. In a few minutes, she burst into the room where Sam was gambling. There was no hesitation in proclaiming to all the news. In an instant, Sam was in the street, hatless and breathless, on his way to the hospital. When he burst through the swinging doors, he was told that no visitors were allowed at that hour, but he might telephone later and find out her condition. Sam flung out of the place a madman. His conscience smote him piteously. His fear seemed to possess voices to shriek themselves into his ears. He found himself in Poplar Street once more, and in Jim's place. Everyone down there was talking of the accident. Sam slunk into a chair. Mrs. Jim was jubilant. Sam's suffering gave her pleasure, for she remembered the jokes he had coined at her expense, his proud days and his arrogance. She stood akimbo in the front of the unhappy man and sneered. "Sam, I reckon you're satisfied now. You done killed Stella." Sam was on his feet in a moment. The spectators thought he would strike his tormentor. "You's a nappy-headed lie. I ain't killed my Stella. You's ought to been dead 100 years ago." Sam's voice sank to a whisper. "God knows I ain't killed my Stella. 'Deed I didn't." He hurried to the nearest telephone booth and called the hospital. He was told over the phone that Stella had sustained a broken rib and several minor scratches and bruises, and that he might call on her at 2 o'clock the next day. This was 11 o'clock at night. At 11:40, Mr. Bronner was awakened by a violent ringing of his doorbell. Hastily slipping into his bathrobe, he hurried down to find Sam on the doorstep. "Come in, Sam. What do you want at this hour of the night?" "Boss, I wants my job back. I just gotta have it. My Stella, done got hit by a car while she was hunting for me. God bless her, I believe she loves me yet. Just try me one more time." "But Sam, you know how you behaved last time. I don't hire gamblers, nor drunkards, nor even those who associate with such. I treated you white, but you didn't appreciate it. Your wife's a fine woman. My wife thinks so too," but Sam grabbed the lapels of Mr. Bronner's bathrobe. His voice shook with the intensity of his emotion. "Boss, give me one more trial. That's all I asked. I hope a shad may shoot me off if I don't make good this time. I got to get my Stella back. I can't go down to the hospital tomorrow and say I ain't got no job." His voice broke into a sob, and he hastily drew back his hand across his eyes. "Stella will think I ain't no good. And she's the best woman in the earth. 'Deed she is. That's reason I ain't been home. My God, boss, you can't turn me down." "Sam, are you going down to your wife, a sensible, steady man, tomorrow? And will you try, God helping you, never give her cause to doubt your manliness again? Are you going to keep her clean and trusting and womanly? If so, you are hired again." Sam's right hand shot up into the air above his head, and his eyes were elevated as he answered reverently, "Before God, I will, boss." And Sam kept his word. And thus endeth the story. Y'all, irony is a playful mistress. Irony shows up when she is least expected, and she makes her presence known in the most curious of ways. Tonight, Irony said, "Julian, you can't go wrong with Zora Neale Hurston. Ever. Why, she is among the blacketiest black authors you've ever read. Even the dialects that she writes in are just steeped in the blackety blackness of blacktery," said Irony. But I didn't know it was Irony talking, so I said, "Oh, you are right. I should read some Zora Neale Hurston, because you can't ever go wrong with Zora Neale Hurston. Not ever." And so then I read two really charmingly written stories of white saviorism and respectability politics and performative Negroism. I made that up, but I mean, on one hand, sure, I guess, like, interesting character study with Sam, the playfulness and then the maturation and, the choice to be a better man because he found the woman of his dreams and she took a chance on him and he proved good. And there's something interesting about the determination of was it Bluefoot, of the old crony, the very determined way that that he was determined to pull his fellow down. Interesting, sure. The descriptions of the homes and the scene setting, what we would call world building if this were fiction based in pure imagination, but this was scene setting. This is, fiction based on real life and times. All of that, done with the blessed pen with which Miss Hurston has written so many of the stories that we love. But ah, tonight, Irony wrote the title of my episode. I didn't know it was her at the time, but Irony is a curious mistress, and she has had her way here tonight, y'all. This has been interesting. It's been an interesting read. Um, I s- um I see so many of the comments. Let's see. So there was a question as to when the earlier story was written, and I don't have those now, but I'll try and post that information on the page. I don't want to flip through the pages right now, but there were some really interesting things. The kitchen bouquet was some clever languaging. Um, I too cracked up at him being convinced that he could bathe in between Saturdays without unsettling the universe. That was funny. None of these characters sounded like they were in their 20s, and part of that was probably the way that I read them, but I read them the way that I read them because that's how they occurred for me off the page. I think I think Tanya with her emojis and Melanin with her emojis, and then we got to this line. I treated you white. What? What though? And yeah, what was up with the repeated keep her clean? I was hoping that was an expression of the time, like but then also the hip hop head in me just kept hearing Juvenile. You keep your body clean, huh? So I sure. I don't know. I don't know. Um It was all whited up. Now our man, Lock Dreamer, we know him as Jarrell or L Jack, says some habits are hard to break. I think he's talking about Sam's habits of gambling and his sort of performative way of being on the street. Or maybe it goes deeper than that. Maybe it's some other habits that Mrs. Zora Neale Hurston found hard to break. Like I said about the other story, we know that Zora Neale Hurston had patrons, and we know that she died pretty poor, pretty much broke. Um, earlier in the season, we read an excerpt of "Looking for Zora" by Alice Walker, um, wherein Ms. Walker went looking for the final resting place of Zora Neale Hurston and purchased a headstone for that space. And in that essay, we learn a little bit about the changes in circumstances in Zora Neale Hurston's life, and that ultimately, at some point, she lost that patron.
Judy Lee is reminding us that Zora Neale Hurston passed in 1960. So, um, around a very critical shift in our culture. She passed just before we started to see some of the more revolutionary mindsets finding their way in the printed works and in the artistic works of some of the people of that era. I don't think it's necessary to justify or excuse um, ex- or explain any of what we read. I think it might it might have some value. There might be some value in contextualizing it. Um, we can appreciate the writing for what it was. The stories told, both of them had some really, really interesting parts, but I think it's safe to say that by our standards today, for what we look for uh, in terms of uplifting and encouraging and soul stirring and uh, even provocative literature that tends to move us here at Storytime with Julian. This fell short. I think that's fair to say. And so here we are at the end of episode 97. You can't really go wrong with Zora. And I think we can leave it at that, yeah. Um Jarrell says he's overlooking the white saviorism and looking at a man who thought he was better than his friends and his demons until he wasn't. And there is an interesting story there, for sure, for sure. I wonder, like, there's a part of me that can't really blame him for the air and the attitude that he took on. I get it, you know, because let's not forget that while they enjoyed him when he was just Sam Shambles, they enjoyed him as Sam Shambles. They enjoyed him in his station, in his position. No one expected nor really wanted him to rise out of that station. And I don't think anybody gave him the credit to be able to do so. So I think that, his his change in attitude was a reflection of their attitudes toward him and even their change in attitude. Um So I don't hold too much of that against him. And also, if you ain't never had nothing, when you finally get something, especially if you get like a lot of really good something after coming off of never having nothing, it takes a period of adjustment. And before he even got all of those material things, what he was most proud of was that even in his shambled state, he was the one man that this sought after woman chose. She chose him. She saw him differently than anybody else in the world saw him. And listen, bruh, I know you know. We all know, as men, we know the love of a good woman, particularly a sought after woman, it'll make you feel some things about yourself. You get 4, 5 feet taller, you know? So I can't really hold it against him when the woman by his side, who had his back, who was on his arm, was the woman that everybody else was trying to get next to. And for all the better they were than him, they weren't good enough for Stella. And he was. And that by itself was enough to make him hold his head a little bit higher and walk a little bit taller. And I can't really fault him for that. I get it. I get it. Listen, y'all, it has been a really, really good it's been a really, really good show. Regardless of what we felt about the stories, it was good spending this time with you all. This has been Storytime with Julian, episode 97, Drenched in Light, Isis's story, the one about the little girl who was wearing the tablecloth and almost got her butt whooped by her granny, was published in 1924, and it was Zora Neale Hurston's first printed piece. So that's an interesting little bit of information. Thank you so much for coming out. We won't see you on Tuesday. We will be back on Thursday with episode 98. Thank you for coming to Storytime with Julian. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Should you feel so blessed and inclined to bless this program, you can bless this program through Cash App and tip your griot at #StorytimeJulian. If you want to bless me personally, because my birthday is coming up, it's just # and my name, Julian Long. And I certainly won't be offended if you want to help me ring in the day in a special way. But thank you all so much for coming out. We will see you next Thursday. Love y'all. Peace. Make sure you share this. Make sure you invite some friends next time. All right.